Okay. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for our How to Be a Strong Applicant event. So the idea of this event, that hopefully you've got the gist of from all the pre-material you were sent out, is to give some practical advice to undergraduate and master's students who are thinking about applying for postgraduate research positions, so PhDs and the like. So my name's Kevin Murphy, so I'm one of the Director of Postgraduate Studies here at Imperial. So I am responsible for the PhD training within 4 of the departments across the Faculty of Medicine. Next slide, please. So first off, I've just got a few little housekeeping things to remind you of. So this event is being recorded. So you'll be available to you online afterwards, and everybody who's registered for the event should be sent a link so that they can access that. So don't worry about trying to scribble everything down, or don't worry if you missed something as it went past a bit quickly. You should be able to get access to that afterwards. It's an MS Teams event, and that means your camera and microphone are switched off at the minute, so I'm afraid you can't communicate to us through that way. All of your communication with us has to be through the Q&A panel, so you can put your questions and comments in there. If you prefer to do so anonymously, that is absolutely fine, and you should have the option of doing that. And please note that you can also up or down vote questions as well, and so we'll be trying to prioritise the questions that more people are interested in the answers of. And as you can see here on the slide as well, you can also turn on auto captions if that makes it easier for you to follow it as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the programme for today. So you are currently in the middle of the welcome and overview, which I'm hoping you're finding very welcoming and maybe very overviewy as well. So in a second, we'll have a couple of short presentations. So the first is going to be from Dr. Liz Elvidge, our head of the Postdoc and Fellows Development Centre. She's going to be talking about the rules of the game and how to put a good application together. And then after that, we're going to have Ms. Katie Dalston, so one of our careers consultants here at Imperial, who's going to talk to you about, I guess, how to communicate with impact and how to put those strong applications in as well. So after that, we're going to move to a panel discussion. So we've had some questions submitted from you already, and we'll be taking questions live as well. So we've got a panel of various people from across the college with different expertises who will hopefully be able to give you a good idea about, I guess, what to think about in ahead of doing a PhD, how you can put your application together, how to make yourself a competitive applicant in that context. So we'll introduce ourselves, we'll have a quick break, and then we'll come back and answer your questions. And then we'll have a quick summary at the end before we close. So hopefully that will meet all of your PhD question needs. Next slide. So this rather complicated looking slide and perhaps rather grandly titled The PhD Landscape is just to explain a bit of, I guess, the nomenclature we use when we're talking about PhDs. And I think if you're not familiar with it, it can be quite complicated, and people often don't understand how they apply for a PhD and what they're called and what they're looking for when they're Googling stuff. So this is just a slide summarising the different kind of PhD opportunities that are available out there. So you can see at the top, we often refer to project-led PhDs, and so they are usually PhDs where a scientist or another investigator within the university has a very specific project that they have funding for a PhD to be associated with. That will usually be advertised specifically by that investigator and the host laboratory, and they will take applications to work on that particular subject. So you can also see PhD fellowships out there, or PhD fellowship schemes. So they may be more general, not usually linked to specific projects. And an example from Imperial would be the President scholarships. So people can apply to that, and they usually have a project in mind that they put together in collaboration with a potential supervisor. And in other institutions, they might work that you simply apply to the scholarship scheme and then decide at a later date what project you'd like to do. So institution PhD programs might be linked to particular centres. So, for example, the Medical Research Council has its London Institute of Medical Sciences PhD programs. The CRIC in London also has a PhD program. And again, that will mean that investigators within those institutions will be hosting students, but when you apply, you don't necessarily know who it is that you might be working with. Doctoral training programs are a more sort of structured framework where we have people coming in, again, often to work in a department or multiple faculties, and they usually have kind of core training, and they work as a cohort together so that you'll be alongside other PhD students for various events during the year. And centres for doctoral training, which have a bit of overlap with those doctoral training programs, they're kind of the same sort of thing, but they're often in a very themed area. So they might work on infectious diseases or the use of AI in healthcare and so on. And again, when you Google these things, you can see lots of opportunities at different universities. Case PhD studentships are usually in collaboration with industry, often advertised as a separate program as well. Clinical research fellowships are available for people who have medical degrees and are usually advertised by the people who fund them, for example, the Wellcome Trust or the British Heart Foundation. And then at the bottom there, you can also see that people sometimes self-fund their PhDs as well. So the costs of the PhD are met by the candidate. And sometimes there are funding opportunities where you can access funding that might pay part of the cost while you yourself fund the rest of them. Okay, so I hope that's helpful for thinking about it, but we're very happy to answer more questions about that later on during the panel. Next slide, please. So one of these opportunities that I particularly want to emphasise is our MRC multi-sci doctoral training programme here at Imperial, which is currently open for applications this year. I think they close about November 16th. And I'm not going to talk about it in a huge amount of detail. You've got the link there. If you Google multi-sci Imperial, you should find the page pretty easily anyway. And that works on specific areas in healthcare, but it gives you a lot of leeway in the kind of interest that you have and who you might want to go and work with that. And the idea is that we recruit for a 4 or 4.5 year training program where you do an initial 1 year master's, and then that gives you a choice or an introduction to Imperial and the different people you might work with to choose which laboratory you'd like to go and do your PhD in. Next slide. So multi-sci is based across multi-campuses, I guess I might say. So here at Hammersmith Hospital, where I'm currently based in my white cell, you can see blurred behind me, and our new White City campus, where it's often integrated with lots of commercial opportunities, and we have a lot of space there for new companies starting off in biotech and similar industries, and also at our South Kensington campus near the Science Museum. Next slide, please. Okay, so following that brief introduction, as I say, very happy to answer questions about that at the panel later on. We're going to move on to Dr. Elvich, who's going to talk to you about the rules of the game.
Okay, great. Can you hear me? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm really pleased to be here. This is a really nice event to be involved with. I'm Liz Elvidge, Head of Postdoc and Fellows Development. I've been at the college for 15 years. A significant part of my job is assessing applications, interviewing for candidates, so I've got enormous amounts of experience. So the talk I'm going to give you, some of the things will be really, really obvious. Some things might not be quite so obvious, but my purpose here is to make sure you stay on the yes pile. Okay, so I'm going to go through the talk, you'll get the slides later, but yeah, it's yours to follow these instructions. Okay, so I'm having to do a Chris Whitty, so next slide, please. Okay, so this is for this would be for a PhD studentship or actually any job. So the goal is to create a strong application. The second goal is to get onto the yes pile. The third goal is to stay on the yes pile. So when you're applying for a job, it's a selection process. And if you get if I say get lots of applications, then the first shift is I look for reasons to reject you. So sorry to be sort of quite so harsh about it, but if I've got 50 applications for one job, I don't have the time to go through in enormous amounts of detail. So your goal is to stay on the yes pile. If you go onto the no pile, then it's very rare for people to come off the no pile. Okay, so the goal is to get onto the yes pile and to stay on it. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to go through my top 10 tips for a strong application. As I said, some are very obvious, but often they are forgotten. So I'm going to go through these one by one. So next slide, please. So the first one is time. So it takes a long time to apply for a job or for a studentship, and however long you think it will take, it probably will take longer. I usually assess, so usually guess that it's equivalent of 1 day for each application, but what I advise you to do is break it down. So doing one application the whole of 1 day might be a little bit too much, so break it down. The second one is don't cut and paste. Okay, so I am really experienced, as many people on this panel are, of assessing applications, and I can spot a cut and paste application within a couple of seconds. And the reason for that is that each application, you need to tailor your application to the individual point that you're applying for. So an example of when I can spot a cut and paste is when there's some words that are being used that are not really part of that scheme. So for example, Royal Society, they always want to you to exhibit what excites you about the science, and so people use the word excite a lot. EPSRC or MRC, they're not so bothered about what excites you, they want to know what the impact is. So when keywords are copied, then I can tell that you've used one application and you're reusing it. So strongly advise you not to do that. So third one is have a record of what you are applying for. I know this sounds really obvious, but sometimes when people are applying for multiple things, then things can get a little bit mixed up. So I was just recruited recently, and clearly one of the candidates was applying for a number of jobs because they said, I'm really delighted to be applying for the job in your the Department of Materials. I'm not in the Department of Materials. So needless to say that application got rejected. So be organised and schedule your time to give it the best amount of effort you can. Next slide, please. Deadlines. So never ever miss the deadline. So if you miss the deadline, you automatically go on the no pile. Things are very competitive, studentships are very competitive. So check when the deadline is. So is the deadline 12? So 12, I won't even ask you this question, but what is 12 p.m? Is it midnight? I think it is midnight. Honestly, I've been in lots of committees where we talk about that. So sometimes you'll see a deadline which is 11:59 a.m. or p.m. So never ever miss the deadline. And so check what it is. Often I will have a deadline of noon. That makes it really easy. Submit early so IT systems can crash, and just check which country you're in. So I've had people applying from Australia, and their timings are different to ours, so they've missed the deadline. So work out how and what needs to be submitted. Servers do crash. And if it's crashed, then your application might not be received, and the recruiters might not know you've applied because it's not being received. So what else do you have to have on? So again, it's the selection process. Don't leave it to the last minute, and just make sure that you timetable everything in so that you can get it in early, or earlier than the deadline, the time deadline. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is probably my golden rule of all top 10. This is the golden rule. So it is follow the instructions. So sometimes people are very cavalier and they think, I know the application says it's got to be 4 pages, but I can't fit everything into 4 pages and I'm going to submit 8 pages. That's an absolute guarantee you get rejected. So follow the rules. If it says 2 sides of A4 for your CV, don't squeeze in your 8-page CV because it's really difficult to read. So again, it's what I said earlier, is make sure you adapt each application to what the recruiter is looking for. Never broaden the margins and never reduce the font size. So if you think, okay, I've got an 8-page CV, I'll cram it all in 2 pages, I'll take out all that margins, I'll put it into Arial font size 8, it is unreadable. So it makes it completely inaccessible. Arial is a very good font to use. It's a very sort of dyslexic friendly font, but whatever they say the font is, just follow the font and the font size. I know this sounds a little bit, crazy when you've got these sort of world leading ideas, but again, it's a selection process and that's part of the filtering. So if it says Arial font size 11, do exactly that. Do exactly what the instructions say. Okay, next slide, please. So research. So ask yourself what interests you about the role. How does it fit with your future or short-term or long-term goals? What are you applying for? So sometimes people are applying for lots and lots of jobs because they need a job, and they forget what it is actually they're applying for. So what's required? Why do you want it? And do you really want it? What do you know about the institute or the company or the department? And so that gives you the lead in to do research. So one of the things that I find really frustrating at an interview is when I ask a candidate, what do you think about our website? And they haven't done any research. They haven't looked at the website. So this again takes the time up of researching. Is it, if you're wanting to do a particular thing in medicine, does that department do actually that particular thing? So do your research. But again, factor that in on your timing. Next slide, please. So achievements and evidence. So as when you're at school, then your CVs will be quite, I'm assuming, relatively short. And then as you move forward, so you get your degree, masters, and graduating, is that sometimes it's about taking things off your CV because they're either really out of date or they're not relevant. So for a CV, every single line, ask yourself, why am I telling them this? So a classic is, why am I telling them that I've got a full, clean driving licence? Do I need to drive for this job? Is there any driving in this job? Have they asked about driving? If there's nothing that asks about driving, then ask yourself, why am I telling them something they've not asked for? So take it off. What makes you the ideal candidate? So you need to be very much focused on your achievements. What have you been successful at? Use very positive words. So for many of you, for applying for jobs and fellowships and studentships, this is not the place for modesty. Okay, so be confident and assertive. And use those active words. So I'm going to go off to slight one tangent, is never lie on a CV. So I know that sounds the most obvious thing, but I have seen people do that. So people claiming that they've gained £500,000 funding and they haven't. So and it's a small world and people find out. So never lie on a CV, but don't value your achievements as well. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a point I said earlier, adapt each application. Don't send in a generic application because that will get rejected. So me as a recruiter, your job is to make me see how a perfect fit you are for what I'm looking for. Okay, so you have to do that work, not me. So tell them why you're the ideal candidate for the studentship or for the job. Don't make me work for that information. Why are you applying for the job or for the studentship or for the fellowship? My advice is to go through the advert and the job description and highlight the keywords and use those keywords. So if it's looking for an exceptional scientist, this may not feel comfortable, but you need to use those keywords in your application. It's about your story, your background, what you can add to it. Some of it is about trajectory as well, so what your potential is. But make sure you make the information interesting, but very, very confident. Okay, next slide, please. Proofreading. So I've just spent the morning on British Council applications. They're about 50 pages each, and they needed proofreading. So you need to check your grammar, the spelling. If you've got a number of spelling, so for me, when I'm recruiting in an application, 3 spelling mistakes and I reject them. So because what I'm then thinking is, if you can't take the care on checking your spelling and your grammar, what's your scientific work like? So very harsh, I know that is harsh, but spelling mistakes, grammar, you need to make sure they are checked. For me, the most misspelt word, if I'm recruiting for an admin post, is details. I've got an eye for details, and it's nearly always misspelt. So again, that gets rejected. So if you're not good at proofreading, then ask someone. There's loads of software now that can check that for you. There's software that will read it back to you, and then when you hear it, that you can see whether it's logical. But if you do need someone to proofread it for you, then again that adds in all the time that it will take you to do that. But logical sentences, spelling and grammar, so important. Okay, next slide, please. 30-second rule. This is a really great game, actually. Is if it's really competitive, there's very little time for the recruiter to look at it. So you might have taken, hopefully you've taken a whole day to craft your application. But again, the people on the panel, if we've got 50 applications, we've got a deadline in a couple of days, we haven't got the time to spend loads of time. So this is a really good thing to try out. So have your CV, give it to someone who is is academically good, but not necessarily in your field. Give them your CV, time it for 30 seconds, take the CV back and say what stands out. What do you remember from my CV? Now, if they say, oh, I didn't know you lived in Putney, or they say, I didn't know you were into knitting, that's not really the things that should be standing out. So it's a great exercise to do. 30 seconds. I'm being quite generous, actually, so sometimes I do it for 20 seconds. But what makes you stand out? What makes you stand out is your achievements, how good you are, how good a candidate you are. Often people look at first page, last page, so make sure your great achievements are not buried on the second page or in the third page. And test your CV out on a number of people, but the end result is, remember, it is your CV as well. When I do one-to-one work with postdocs, their achievements are their achievements, but it's often about the layout. And if things are really buried, the really significant stuff, then I won't catch them. So 30-second rule or 30-second game. It's a good exercise. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is when I really wish I did have £1 for every time I have to correct this. Okay, so there's referees and there's references. A referee is the person who writes your reference. The reference is what the referee writes. And so this sounds like one of those really weird pub quizzes. But so the references are the written document and they're written by your referees. So thinking about your referees, first of all, have you asked them? So I'm guessing your referees at this point would be your supervisors. And it's up to you whether you decide to tell them. I think it's better if you do talk it through with them, because then they can perhaps give you some advice about that. If you have to have 2 or 3 referees, just make sure you know that the people writing your references, the referees, are going to write you a really good reference. Okay, so and I'm never that happy when I've had when people have asked me to write my own reference, so that it's really hard to write your own reference. So think carefully about who your referees are. So referee, that's the person, reference, that's the document. Okay, next slide, please. So seek advice. So you've got a great team at Imperial. You've got your colleagues. You've got supervisors. I would definitely seek advice from people. So ask people what it's like to do a PhD, what was their journey like, and ask people if they would be willing to have a look at your CV and application, so to give you feedback about that. The only word of caution I would give, if you ask lots and lots of different people, they might give you quite contradictory advice, and so then it's really up to you to decide what is the best for you. But the best for you is to tailor your application to the thing you're applying for, and to make sure that you follow the instructions. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, that's my top 10 tips. So time, give it time. Deadlines, make sure you know when the deadline is, don't miss it. Follow the instructions, so important. Do the research, why do you want this job? What are they looking for, not just you? Stand out of your achievements and the evidence, adapt each application. You will get quicker, you will get faster at it. Proofreading is really important. 30-second rule for someone looking at your CV, referees and references, and then seeking advice. Okay, thank you very much. over to Katie.
Hi folk, I'm Katie. I'm the careers consultant who looks after postgraduate medicine. So I've been asked to come along, and what I'm actually going to do is do a deep dive into some of the stuff that Liz has been talking about already, and probably help reiterate some of those other things. I've also got at the end of my wee patter some places where you can go and get help. So some of you may have met me already. If you haven't, that's who I am. I have worked at many different universities in the past and helped support with PhD applications. I used to train academic staff at UCL in particular on how to recruit for PhDs, and we used to work together to organise interviews. So this is why they've asked me to do this wee section on communicating with impact. So what I'm planning to do today is focus on three kind of key areas. If I can have the next slide, please, Alex. So I guess what Liz was talking about is all about that tailoring. And these days, there is something about copying and pasting, definitely. There's lots of tools out there that can support you in helping to write these statements. Things like ChatGPT and all the generative AI. And we know that students use those. And actually, as a starting point, sometimes they can be really useful. But please make sure that you come back to all of the rules that Liz and I have given you to make sure that the tailoring, and you will find that, you know, those generative AI tools cannot write you a personal statement. They can give you some starting points, they can fill a blank piece of paper. But what you are going to need to do is then think about who you're tailoring this for and frame it. So these sort of three top questions when you're thinking about writing personal statements, but also when you're going into interviews. And actually, the more work you put into your personal statements, the easier your interview may be, because you've already done a lot of that preparation. So these ideas are thinking about who are you communicating with. So put yourself in the shoes of the reader or of the listener. If you haven't spoken to your personal tutor or a supervisor about applying for a PhD or doing a PhD, that's a really good place to start, because quite often they can give you lots of insights, as we're sharing today. So have a chat to somebody about this sort of idea and help them to understand things like what Liz was talking about in terms of what are we looking for, and then you have a better idea of what you need to put in the documents. These documents, so it might be a CV, it might be a personal statement, it might be a cover letter, it could be a speculative email where you're approaching a potential supervisor. These documents are all going to be individualised for the particular organisation, but they are also going to be read by a person who's got some ideas in mind of what they need to see. And the easier you can make it for that person to find that, the higher up on the pile you're going to be and the more time you're going to spend. So Liz was very generous with her 30 seconds. I think I spend about 8, to be honest. 8 to 10 seconds. I can tell a good CV from a bad CV that quickly, and I already know if I'm going to spend more time shortlisting you. Okay, so your documents are less about what you want to tell somebody and more about what those people need to hear. So if you do have an 8-page CV, think less about everything you need to include in that or you want to include in that, and think more about who's reading it and what do they need to hear, and that can help you bring it down to a much shorter document. Okay, so this is where we're thinking about the framing it. Who are you communicating it with? What do they need to hear? And how do they need to hear it? So Liz mentioned reading the instructions. When I worked with the NHS, one of the biggest things we asked for in our application form was not to include a CV. So as soon as someone included a CV for a clinical PhD, we wiped out their application. As Liz said, we're looking for reasons not to take you forward at that initial stage. Okay, so if you think about PhDs, you're going to need good attention to detail. If you can't read an application form, I don't really want you to do my PhD because I don't know what else you're going to miss during that process. Can I have the next slide, please, Alex? So just to give you an idea of how we can take that impact. So I think one of the hardest things to explain in a personal statement or in a cover letter is why you want to do something. So your reasoning. And Liz mentioned it's going to be individual to each particular PhD. But when you are writing that statement, it's about you. So if you read through this very short, I've only given you the start here because otherwise it's a little bit overwhelming in terms of a slide. But when you read through this particular start of a personal statement, actually all it's doing is giving me statements. So I think this is going to be really good. I am really interested in it. As a reader, the first thing I think when I read a statement like, I'm really interested in doing a PhD in neuroscience as I hope to make research in my career, the first thing I think is, oh, why are they interested in neuroscience? And why do they want to make research their career? So when you find yourself writing these sorts of statements or saying these sorts of statements at an interview, make sure you then back it up with evidence. So if we move to the next slide, please, Alex. It's all about the evidence. And that's where you're matching yourself. So when you say a statement, write that statement, make sure the next thing brings in your experience. So especially when you're talking about why this particular PhD. The person who's recruiting you knows all about themselves. They know all about the research group they're in. They know all about the university that they work for. They're interested in knowing why you are interested in their particular university. And it's bringing that evidence in to match yourself to what you already know. So using a limited word count to tell me all about how amazing I am is not going to work. You need to use that limited word count to mention something you've learned about me, but then match yourself to that. Okay. And if we move to the next slide, hopefully I've got some examples of that. So this is a slightly better personal statement. Obviously, it's only the starting points, but what you're seeing here is more bringing in of evidence, getting quite specific. So suddenly I'm learning that you've done both an undergraduate and master's study. I'm learning more about what you've learned around bacterial pathogens. And I'm learning more about what you're hoping to move into. So one of the things that you'll always want to include in a personal statement or in an interview is, what are you thinking about doing out the other side of that PhD? Now, obviously, it's 3 or 4 years away, so potentially you might change your mind, and that's absolutely fine. But what I'm thinking as a reader is, have they thought about where they're going? How have they evidenced how they know they want to get there? So what have you done in the past to reality check that you're going to enjoy what you're doing out the other side? And then you tell me about how that PhD is going to help you get there. So you're almost writing a story and bringing in your experiences to support the types of statements. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense. They're much harder to write, I think, than CVs, absolutely. And if you are going into an interview situation, you're going to want to practice explaining your reasoning for why you want to do something out loud. And that's where the impact comes from. So when we're talking about impact, we're talking about how you influence people to understand your way of thinking. If you think about how you work in a group, so if you're doing group activities, you have somebody who will understand your reasoning one way, so you will pitch it. So for example, if you want to go to a movie with somebody, you might say, hey, I know that person just loves going to the movie, so I'm just going to say, oh, let's go and see a movie. What are you interested in? If you know somebody doesn't necessarily like movies, but is really interested in sci-fi, and you want to go and see a sci-fi movie, you'll pitch it to say, hi, yeah, can we go and see this sci-fi movie? So you're changing the way you communicate with people to make sure that the pitch is specifically for them. Okay, next slide, please, Alex. And it's all about that matching. And I found this, it looks very old now, but this old picture that hopefully as a biochemist, with some people with biochemistry background, you start to understand. So it's all about saying, this is what you're offering me for my PhD. This is what I know I enjoy. Look, we match. Okay. And if we move to the next slide, hopefully you'll come up with these 3 overarching questions. So when you're writing documents, Read those instructions. If they ask you specific questions which you need to answer within that personal statement or within that document, answer those. Quite often, however, you might get no questions at all. It might just say, here's an area for you to put your supporting information. And if that's the case, then you will try and focus on these three kind of overarching questions. So why this PhD or research area or topic? Why this research organisation or group or university? And then can you do it? Okay. Quite often the can you do it comes through anyway when you're giving me the evidence of why you want to do it, because you'll be saying, you know, I'm really interested in this area of research. I know this because I've done my undergraduate program on this, and that helped me to understand this element of it. So I'm already seeing some of that experience in the can you do it from telling me that you want to do it. So the language and the way that you frame a motivation answer is very different from how you might frame a can you do it answer. So for example, if you're uploading a CV and you've got a personal statement, your CV tells me every single skill you can do, okay, or have done in the past, whereas your personal statement will cherry pick the ones that you want to do. And you won't just say, I can do this in a personal statement. You'll say, I enjoy doing this. I get, you know, satisfaction out of doing this. This is what kind of makes me want to turn up for work or for my PhD every day. Okay, so it's slightly framed slightly differently because it's a motivation, and that's where the impact comes from. Next slide, please, Alex. So just to help you out with this, because sometimes thinking about it, it's all about reflecting actually on what you've done in the past and how you can then frame it to help somebody else understand how that experience helped you learn that you want to do your PhD. So we've put together some little videos on the careers website. All of the links are in the slides. So when this, I know this is being recorded, when this goes up, there'll be a copy of the slide deck so you can see the links as well. Either that, or you can just head along to our careers support website, and that's going to help you out. The other place you can get support is, next slide please, Alex. Information on funding. I know we get lots of questions around funding, so please do check out our funding website with links. I'm not a funding expert, but there is some interesting support there. Next slide please, Alex. We have a careers service sessions that can help you with things like CVs, application forms, personal statements. We've got one on LinkedIn, so that thing Liz said about talking to other people who've done a PhD. LinkedIn's a really good tool for finding people, especially if it's not an imperial PhD, so finding people at different universities who might have been supervised or worked in that particular group. So LinkedIn's really useful. We do an essentials on LinkedIn. And then you can also come along to one of our careers labs, which is called To PhD or Not to PhD. That's about an hour and a half, and we give you lots and lots of questions to help you think about why you're doing a PhD and what you need to put in that application form. So that runs every couple of weeks. You can sign up to all of these on Jobs Live, and again, all those links will come through. Next slide, please, Alex. And the other tool that you've got, and this is available 24/7 because it's an online course, it's called Attributes and Aspirations, which you can access at any time you like. It's got lots of information about Imperial. It's also got lots of stuff around career planning, including applying for PhDs. It's designed specifically for the Faculty of Medicine master's students. So if we've got any undergrads, sorry, this one isn't for you, but for the master's students, there's a whole lot about applications. There's all sorts of support on there about reflecting and thinking about why it is that you want to go forward with this. And I know Liz was framing it in terms of making the best application, but actually for yourself, signing up to a 3 or 4 year program, you definitely want to make sure that you've reality checked it as well. So going through this process can be really helpful. And I think that's my last slide. Last slide, Alex. Yeah, brilliant. So this is how you can get in touch with the careers service. All of our careers consultants, so you can always book a one-to-one appointment to chat this through. All of our careers consultants are very au fait with talking about PhDs and applying for PhDs. And yeah, thank you very much for listening. And I'm now going to hand back to Kevin, I think.
Okay, thanks very much, Katie, for that. Okay, so we're now reaching the panel questions and discussion part of the presentations today. So thanks again to Katie and Liz for their presentations, and obviously they've introduced themselves a little bit, but I'd like to introduce you to the rest of the panel at this point. Just working down the list, if we start with Professor Myra McClure from the Department of Infectious Disease.
Hello, I'm Myra McClure. I'm actually a Professor Emerita now of retrovirology, and I ran for many years a clinical section with a diagnostic lab attached to it. But lots of experience in interviewing from medical students all the way up to chairs at Imperial. So I agree with everything Liz has told you.
Thanks very much, Myra. Dr. Angela Kedgley.
Hi, my name is Angela Kedgley, and I'm a reader in orthopedic biomechanics in the Department of Bioengineering. I was formerly the Director of Postgraduate Studies for Research, so I've read a lot of PhD applications, and I also serve on the Management Committee for the MRC DTP, which doubtless many of you will be applying for.
Thanks very much, Angela. And Dr. Jeffrey Vernon.
Hello, everybody. I am the faculty senior tutor in the Faculty of Medicine, and I've got a special mission for supporting postgraduate students, so masters and PhD students, and I've sat on innumerable selection, admissions and interview panels.
Okay, thanks very much, Jeffrey. Okay, so we are your panel, but we are also about to take a short break, which you may be grateful for as well at this point. So I think we're scheduled to start again at 2, which is a slightly longer break than we perhaps need, but it's probably sensible to keep with that schedule. So in the meantime, if you'd like to think about questions, put what you'd like in the Q&A, but also have a look at the questions other people have asked as well. And please note you can vote them up if you think that you'd like them answered as well, and we'll try and answer the ones that are more upvoted first if we can. And great, so we will see you in just under 20 minutes back here. Thanks very much.
So Kevin, can you hear me if I speak? Can everybody else hear me too? They can't. Okay.
I can hear you.
Yeah, I don't mean the panelists and the presenters, I mean the audience. Can they hear it? Yes, okay.
Yep. I mean, this could, of course, be an awkward 20 minutes. Please feel free to, to take your own break as well, panel members.
Thanks, Kevin. I'll be back.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. And I guess thanks for sticking with us. So hopefully you should, if not now, in a second, be able to see all of your panel members waiting for your questions coming in. You should also hopefully have noticed that we've managed to answer quite a lot of the questions online. So as I said before, we've had some submitted beforehand. There was a couple I thought I might just quickly answer because I think they kind of speak to how confusing it can be when you're thinking about these things and you don't know much about a PhD, but they're actually fairly simple to answer. So some people had asked questions about when you apply for a PhD, is the scholarship application conducted at the same time? And what you would do if you got the PhD but failed to get a scholarship? So at Imperial, yes, usually when you apply, you tick various boxes saying that you're applying for particular scholarship schemes, and actually the application form also has a section which says if you fail to receive a scholarship funding for this, are you able to continue with this PhD? And for a lot of people that is obviously no, because they're unable to do it without funding. So usually they do correspond like that. That might not be true for applications at other institutions, but for us it pretty much is you apply at the same time, yes. The thing to bear in mind, though, is that some of these scholarship programs will expect you to have contacted a supervisor beforehand. So an example for that would be our President's Scholarship approach, where you would very much expect somebody would have talked to a potential supervisor and helped put a project together around that application before they submit electronically. So do keep an eye on that kind of guidance. Okay. So as I say, there's a lot of questions in the Q&A, and I thought maybe it was just worth us starting off with a bit of a discussion around some sort of general areas. And I thought maybe talking first about prepping your application. So this is even before you're writing your application, but thinking about what to do beforehand. And I think I'd just like to ask the panel members, how do you think, if you're interested in doing a PhD, how do you think the best way to go around finding a suitable PhD program is? If we start maybe with Myra. I think you're muted, Myra, sorry.
We are. I'm probably not the best person to give advice on this, Kevin, because I come in afterwards, after they've approached these award schemes and come in at the interview level. General advice to looking to look for any supervisor is, I mean, I can only talk from experience and the experience of my students. They've usually liked a particular topic and they've found who works in that particular topic, and then they've approached them. And that's not a bad way to go about things in general.
Okay, great. Katie?
So I think a really good way to find a PhD supervisor is, yes, absolutely look at the topics, but then you might want to, if you can't have a chat with that supervisor because they could be very busy, you might struggle for some of them to get back to you. You can use tools like LinkedIn or connections that you might have to find other people that have been supervised by that particular supervisor, or have a chat to other people who work in their lab or in their research group, and that will just give you an idea. And I think that it's really important for you as a person to think about what you want out of a supervisor, because there'll be some supervisors that will be incredibly hands-on and in their labs all the time and there to support you. And there'll be some supervisors who will leave you to work a little bit more independently. And both of these supervisors are lovely and absolutely fine. But you need to know which one you would prefer and which one might be right for you. So don't just think about how you explore that, what that supervisor's like. Make sure you've got an idea of what you're actually looking for as well.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. I also think when people are looking for a suitable program, they may be looking for something in a particular area and not have very specific ideas around it. So obviously, having an idea of what you like to do, but also it is worth thinking about where there might be doctoral training programs or particular centres offering PhDs, and doing a bit of Googling around more general areas. I work in obesity and food intake, for example, and you can see if there's programs in that. You can actually go into funders sites as well, places like the Wellcome Trust or the Medical Research Council. Though you might not apply directly to them, they will often have a list of the doctoral training centres that they fund, which might give an idea of strategically what kind of area they're in, and then you can go and look at the specific website for that. Jeffrey, I can see you waving.
Yes, thank you. I think if you know that you're strongly interested in a particular area, then a very good thing to do is look on PubMed, because if you do on a PubMed search and you type in your key terms, so you might be interested in the microbiome, or you might be interested in microbiome and the brain, you can find out who's working on that subject. You can filter it by country or by town. You might find there was someone at Imperial doing that. If they weren't at Imperial, they might be at some other university that is advertising PhD studentships. So if you find a particular lab or supervisor that you like the look of, maybe write a speculative letter to them saying, you know, are there PhD opportunities in your department or in your university, or would you be prepared to work up an application with me? We'll probably get onto this subject later in the talk, which is how do you approach someone? You know, how do you write a hard-working email? So I won't say any more about that now, but if you are going to approach someone, I don't think you would send a very long email. I don't think you would send them your CV straight away. You know, you want to make a good short approach to your first question, because the answer might just be no, we're not looking for anyone. But I think PubMed can be your friend in this kind of situation.
Okay, thanks, Jeffrey. That's very helpful. And I guess anybody else who's in terms of supervisors, Angela?
I think you should just speak to as many people as possible. And in particular, speak to your GTAs. They have applied for PhDs. In most cases, they're going to be PhD students themselves. They've applied for PhDs very recently. They've looked at the different programs. And if you're taking a course that seems like it might be relevant, or they're supervised by somebody in the field, they will know the other people in the field as well. And they will know which programs are currently running in a way that perhaps even the professors do not.
Okay, yeah, I think that seems very sensible. And I think going back to Jeffrey's point about sending an email to somebody that you're interested in working with, I think that is a good idea. It is helpful to give them the idea that you're talking to them specifically. I think everybody understands you'll be talking to multiple investigators and exploring different options. I do get a lot of generic emails where it's quite often, it's really obvious it's been cut and pasted. Occasionally they get my name right, but not all the time. And it's a very generic, I would like to do some research and things like that. And I would much prefer to, you know, to have some more specifics and some idea that you've actually looked at what it is I do and I work on. Liz?
Yeah, just in terms of the email, is on the side of formal and professional. So starting the email which with hire is not a good start. So you can, you know, formal, professional, get someone to sense check it for you, shorter rather than longer, but sure you've done your background research as well. So you'd be saying, you know, dear Dr. Elvidge, I see that you're an expert in X and I might be interested in joining your lab. So short and sweet, but formal.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. And if you could tell my undergraduates to stop starting emails with hire as well, that would be great. Myra?
Kevin, two small points. One is I have a difference of opinion with Jeffrey. If you're going to write to me, for example, about asking for a PhD place, the first thing I want to see is your CV. So it doesn't do any harm to send it with it and save us both a little bit of time. The second thing I would say was, if you're asking for advice about programs, it's quite different from the specific advice I would give for asking about supervisors. I mean, you can do quite specific things to decide whether or not this particular supervisor is for you or not. And one thing to do, which I always recommend, is to talk to people in his lab, away from him, just see the group, chat to them, to look at PubMed, as Jeffrey says, and see what the activity of the lab is like. If there have been no publications from this supervisor's lab in the last few years, then that should ring alarm bells to you, I think. And look at his profile. I mean, if he's a big player in the Royal College of Physicians, for example, and he's a champion golfer and he's a government advisor, you need to ask yourself, how much time is he actually spending in the lab with his students? And if he's not there, who is there? How many postdocs does he have? What's the ratio of postdocs to PhD students? How long have they been there? Are they likely to be there when I start the lab, for example, or are they all in their third year and when I get there, there's nobody to help me? These are the sort of things that will help you get into a safe environment when you start your PhD.
Yes, and I think sometimes when you're talking to somebody or emailing them, it's quite difficult to ask for this kind of information. But I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, oh, I'd really like to talk to another member of your lab to find out how it runs and the sort of things you work on and stuff like that. And I think most supervisors are very happy to do that. From a supervisor's point of view, you've got to bear in mind that they're looking for people who are a good match with the way that their research runs as well. So it makes sense that you kind of gel and that the expectations on both sides in that sense are met, I think. The other thing I would say is, I think we talked about, you know, when you're emailing, you might say, do you have opportunities in your lab at the minute? And do you supervise students on this DTP, or do you supervise, you know, president scholarships and things like that? So you're kind of floating the idea that maybe if they don't have specific studentships available themselves, that you might be interested in working with them to put together an application for another scheme. That does involve a little bit of work on your part, though, because you need to look at what might be available in that institution, for example. Okay. There's been a few questions as well, kind of overlapping on the idea of who's the best referees to use. Now, I know we've tried to answer some of those in the chat, but I thought it might be kind of helpful to pull together some of those ideas together. So I guess, Liz, I don't know if you want to start. Yep.
So in terms of referees, you would need your ideally your personal tutor or someone that you've worked with. But I would always go for someone you know will write a good reference. Now, I know that sounds really obvious, but sometimes people don't write good references, and it's not because they don't think you're particularly good, but they're just not very good at writing writing references. So I would go for someone that, hand on heart, so you can say, I know they will write me a really good reference. Unless you're asked for a character reference, I wouldn't put a character reference in. This is in academics. If you're looking for a PhD studentship, this is an academic setting. And I also wouldn't go for the most senior person you vaguely know, because they won't be able to write you a good reference because they don't know you. So one, someone who does know you, and two, that that they will write you a good reference. And to me, you know, if someone says, okay, I'm happy to be your referee, but you write it for me, I'm never that keen on that. So that's what I'd say.
Right, thank you. Anyone else like to comment on that? Jeffrey?
I did reply to this earlier in the chat, but I think it's a problem a lot of students will face. So they will say things like, I don't have anyone who can comment about my research experience because I haven't done my master's research project yet, or I didn't really do an undergraduate research project. I think if you can find someone who says they're prepared to be your referee, don't be afraid to ask them if they would like to have a meeting with you about that. And I have sometimes said to students who've asked me to write them a reference, I've said, well, of course I know you and I've marked your work, but I'd like to meet you to understand a bit about your motivations, your suitability to study that research, whether you have realistic ideas about what it's going to be like. That person, that potential referee, will then be in a stronger position to comment on whether you really would be a good match. So if you're really stuck and you don't have someone who can talk knowledgeably about your work, and yet you have a strong desire to do a PhD, you don't want to be held back by lack of a referee, try and find a sympathetic lecturer from your undergrad or master's experience who will have that conversation with you.
Okay. And I think the other thing to bear in mind is that, I mean, you know, we as academics, we're used to writing a lot of references, but if you want a really good reference, then hopefully you've done something really good in those past positions with people, that you've shown that you've gone above and beyond, that you did your lab project where you worked incredibly hard and showed initiative and were a great help to the PR. Now, I know you can't guarantee this for everything, but there is this idea that somebody is automatically going to write me a great references. But what actually people automatically do is write you a perfectly decent reference. But I tell you, the thing that really compels me if I'm recruiting is this person worked with me, and if I had a PhD, I would give it to them. And then I think, okay, that sounds like the sort of person that actually I want to take on to do a PhD. They've had that much of an influence on somebody that they really would take them on themselves. Now, you can't guarantee that for everything, but it is worth thinking about that when you're in your research placements, that simply turning up and doing kind of what you are compelled to do to get a result is not necessarily what gets you the best reference in the world. And to be fair, if you're really interested in research and this is what's driving you forward into this, then I would hope that every opportunity you offered, you kind of grasp with both hands, and that is obvious to the people who are around you in that. But it is maybe worth having a chat with them to try and bring that out in the reference as well, if possible. Okay. So I guess related to the idea that you might not know people or have had a huge experience with people, I think one of the other concerns that I can see coming out of the pre-questions and online is the fact that you're often applying very early in your either your final undergraduate year or at the beginning of your master's year for these PhD opportunities. And it's actually that people are saying, well, what do you do if you aren't able to show these experiences very well because they're sort of about to happen or you've not had much opportunity before? I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts about that. Don't rush me, you know, but if anybody. It's Jeffrey. Oh, sorry, Myra first, I think, and then Jeff.
I wouldn't be too hung up on experience at that stage of a career. I mean, supervisors don't really expect much in the way of experience. So if you haven't done your project yet, or if you haven't got any publications, or if you haven't got much experience, I wouldn't worry about it. All supervisors are pretty experienced in seeing potential or lack of it. I would just go ahead and apply. And as Liz said, apply as early as possible, because if the supervisor doesn't have money for you, but is willing to apply for money or willing to encourage you to apply for a fellowship, these things take time, 6 to 9 months, in fact. So the sooner you apply, the better. And if he does have money, the sooner you get your claim in for it, the better too. So don't get hung up on not having the experience. I mean, from my point of view, if people could handle a pipette, I was quite happy. The rest we teach them in the lab, you know.
Thank you. Jeffrey?
I think if you feel that your CV is a bit thin, you don't have very much to say in your CV, focus on your statement, your covering letter, anything else that can show evidence that you are looking forward. So do you understand the kinds of projects that might be offered if this is an umbrella scheme? You know, which of those in particular are you interested in? Why are you interested in them? Do you know what that lab does? Do you know why that lab's work is important? And similarly, if you're at the beginning of your master's student, your master's course, talk about, and you haven't started your project, talk about your upcoming project or what projects are available for you to select and what you hope to be working on and what approaches you might be taking. You know, you may have to put some extra work into convincing the selectors that you're thinking realistically about what research looks like and about your own, you know, your own ambitions to do that kind of work.
Okay, great. Angela?
I think the other thing is to not discount any other positions where you've had responsibility in your life. I mean, presumably you haven't just been pursuing your academic studies, you've been involved in societies or clubs or athletic pursuits. And personally, if I see a cover letter and somebody says, look, I haven't had research experience, but I'd be competing at a national level on this team or something. I mean, they've had to take initiative and be dedicated to something and take responsibility. And those kinds of attributes also reflect well on a PhD application. So it's not just about having been in a lab for many hours a day, because you can be in a lab for many hours a day and not necessarily make a great PhD applicant. So make the most of all the things you've done.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And actually, I sometimes think when I look at PhD students, one of the real things that is a predictor of people doing pretty well is the ability to kind of own a problem and to try and to do a bit of problem solving yourself. And actually often people telling me about experience, you know, it might be in their Saturday job or lots of other things they've done where this is what happened and this is what I needed to do, and then I pursued this and I talked to somebody and I got this sorted out. I think, well, actually that looks like somebody who can do this kind of thing in a very different setting, but actually the core kind of skills are there. And I see online people are, yeah, also saying lack of research experience and things like that. So, I mean, if you really feel you need more, of course, if you're an undergraduate, there is the possibility of doing a master's. I think we understand that that is not available for everything, and there are obviously financial implications there. I would also say, depending how early you are, but for undergraduates, there are an awful lot of kind of summer studentship programs out there. They might be associated with the university, they might be associated with professional organisations. So from my point of view, I'm an endocrinologist, and the Society for Endocrinology and the British Society of Neuroendocrinology, I'm sure you're all members of those, offer summer studentships. But you don't actually need to be a member as the student to apply for it. And usually what you might do is look up the opportunities, and then maybe you talk to an investigator about whether they'd be willing to host you, for example. And a lot of those will actually do it at the end of your final year as well. So even if you haven't got it, you might be able to say, well, look, I've independently applied for this thing and it looks like I'm going to be funded, you know. So you're giving the impression that, look, you're focused on research, you're doing your best to get what experiences you can, even if you've not had stuff handed to you on a plate, for example. Okay. Somebody else asked or wanted to know how much you need to know about, I guess, the sort of institute and the scheme that you're applying for. So I guess I would say, I personally would say you need to know enough that you're not going to be embarrassed. And you're not going to make mistakes where you're talking about something that isn't offered. Oh, I look forward to doing the first warm-up masters, you know, or in fact the scheme doesn't offer that, for example. Now that doesn't mean you need to pore over hundreds and hundreds of web pages of it, but you should have a pretty much a basic idea of what they're offering and what they're doing. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll chip in on that one. I absolutely agree with you, Kevin. I think that there's so much, it is so easy to find out things now. So, you know, you go onto the institution, there's so much on the web pages, and yes, you don't need to do a massive deep dive. But if someone says, was to, you know, apply to Imperial and say, you know, is it possible to do a joint immunology and history degree, then I think you haven't really done your research, because we don't do history. So it's all about doing a little bit of prep, making yourself look that you've sorted, you've looked at things, and that, you know, you're there confident to say, I'd really like to do no, I'm not even going to try and say that one.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm a geologist. It's much easier to say geology.
Yeah. And it is perhaps worth thinking about that when you're applying for this thing, it's very easy to see it as this abstract thing that you're in competition with people for. But essentially what you're kind of asking for is that somebody is going to pay at least 90 grand towards your continued education. And in reality, when you've got stipend and tuition and running costs, probably more than that. And so if somebody was applying to me and asking for 90 grand to develop their education, I would hope they'd have done a little bit of work to find out exactly what that was going to involve, maybe showing a little bit of being on the front foot here, and being able to answer some questions around it. So definitely doing a bit of research around it, I think is pretty helpful. Jeffrey, I think, and then Angela.
I do not. So we've had some helpful advice on what to do. I'm never very impressed by candidates that say, I want to come here because you are the world-beating, fantastic, most excellent galactic centre for neuroscience or whatever it is, even though that will be true, you know, in some cases. I think the panel gets weary of hearing that, and they think you're just, you know, trying to ingratiate yourself with them. You can use that time to say something stronger about your reasons for applying. So don't just try and flatter the reader or the audience.
Thank you. I think it was Angela and then Katie. Yeah.
I was just going to say, please be aware of the fact that different PhD programs are structured very differently and have different requirements for what you may need to do as part of that program. So please, as everybody else has said, read the instructions, but then be aware that that is the program, and don't come into it saying, well, I really want to do this other program, but I figured you might give me money. So it's not about just giving you the money, it's about doing the program as a whole and taking whatever training opportunities are available with that. And if that program isn't for you, that's okay. That program isn't for you. and you make that decision. But please don't come into it expecting you're going to change the program.
Right, Katie?
Yeah, and I guess from your perspective, if you're thinking about how well you're going to be able to complete the PhD program, you want to be able to reality check that you're going to enjoy being part of that particular program, that you're going to enjoy being part of that university. So there's really something about you going, hang on a minute, this is what I know about this organisation. This is how I've reflected on what I've experienced in the past, and that helps me to understand that I'm going to be able to fit really well into this particular lab or program. So what Jeffrey was saying about, you know, actually, is it the biggest and the best? It might be, but if you're going to tell me it's the biggest and the best, tell me how you know that's for you. So that whole idea of what I mentioned in my talk was, if you say something like, you guys are the biggest and the best, make sure your next statement links to you as to why that is something you know you're going to fit into. So that's why lots of people tend to steer away from saying you're the biggest and the best, and you pick something that's a little bit more nuanced. And actually you can sit there and go, these are kind of the things that I'm going to be able to do in this PhD, and it's specific to this particular program. So like Angela says, understanding the program. Here's how I know that that's what I'm going to enjoy doing for the next 3 years, 4 years. Look, we match. So it's that idea of matching yourself up. And we actually have some example PhD personal statements in the Attributes and Aspirations course as well. So when you get the slides, you can have a look at those.
Okay, great. Okay, so again, looking at the questions, and we some of these have been answered, but there's a lot of people asking about whether they go direct from undergraduate to PhD or whether they have to do a master's first. And so I guess I would say looking at the specific program is really important here as well. Some programs will have what we call a 1+3 structure, where they might be associated with a master's that is part of the program. So if you have a master's already, you're going to have to do that second master's anyway. And some courses like that may not take people who already have a master's, for example. People often talk about usually, and certainly Europe in I guess continental Europe, it's usually much more typical for people to go into a PhD after having done a master's. In the UK, it is a bit less typical, though certain universities have started to follow that routing. For Imperial, it's certainly not necessary. Obviously, a master's does give you an opportunity to have more research experience and to talk about more stuff, but we also definitely do every year on, I think, pretty much, certainly in medicine, on most of our schemes take people who do not have masters. And for the multi-site DDP, as I mentioned before, that has a 1-year master's course as the first year of it anyway. I don't know if anybody else has got any thoughts around that. Okay, Angela?
I was just going to say some PhD programs are also quite well suited to people who do have professional experience. So again, it's about finding the PhD program that's right for you. I'm involved in the Center for Doctor Training for Prosthetics and Orthotics, and we frequently get professionals who have done a clinical career who come back to then do a PhD as part of the program. And so I think it's figuring out, is there an opportunity for you to do a part-time PhD if you are a professional? Because sometimes that's an option. Do you have to be full-time? Where do you have to live? Do you have to move? And it's not necessarily positive or negative that you've got work experience, but it can be an advantage in certain situations where that's a good match for the program.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you often see across college actually that if people may not have the usual requirement, often if you think that you have experience that instead makes up for your lack of a master's that is required for something, it's a really good idea to try and talk to the course director or somebody involved with that scheme, and it may be that they can make a particular case because of the experiences that you have. I'm not saying that's a guarantee in every case, but particularly if you have really relevant work experience, it's worth considering that and worth trying to talk to somebody about it. Okay, I also noticed a question about somebody asking, well, if you're applying for overseas, as an overseas student, is it worth applying to some of these schemes? Because often it's a bit more competitive as an overseas student. So first off, for Imperial, there is a scholarship tool that I think is pretty useful on the website. If you Google Imperial and scholarship tools, you can put in kind of what level of degree you're looking for, your kind of student status, and that generally gives you a rundown of what's available. There are certainly fewer studentships available for overseas students typically. And that's because I guess a lot of them are funded by UK research organisations, and usually they expect the majority of them to go to, I guess, people, UK taxpayers or from families of UK taxpayers. But a lot of the schemes do often offer things to overseas students as well. There may be fewer overseas places, but to be fair, if you don't apply for them, you have zero chance of getting that studentship. And I guess being aware that they're more competitive perhaps tempers your expectations a bit. But yeah, it's certainly feasible. And on most of our schemes, we do see international students. I would say as well, if you are international, it may be worth thinking about applying to earlier rounds of things as well. So, for example, for the Imperial President scholarships, sometimes departments may cap how many international students they're willing to take. And if those places go in the first round of a scheme, then they can't take an overseas student in subsequent rounds. So you may want to look at the earlier deadlines where there are different rounds of application, for example. Again, usually there's some kind of contact email address if you're looking for further details on that as an overseas student. It can probably give you a bit of advice. I don't know if anybody else has any other thoughts on that in terms of international applicants. Angela?
Just this doesn't have to do with applying in the UK, but if you are an international student, you may want to look at if there are any funding opportunities from your home governments or from institutions in your home country that may enable you to study overseas, because we do get applicants who have their own funding, but then are looking for a place to study. And so then they would have the funding package that was awarded to them. And that gives you a lot of leverage to go to different PIs and say, you know, I have this funding and I'm interested in this area. Could we develop a PhD together? So if you are able to secure your own funding, that makes you an applicant that has one, maybe fewer thing you need to sort out.
Okay, great. So I guess thinking about writing an effective application, I think we had a couple of really good talks actually about actually putting this together anyway. Some of the questions are around a bit how would you make your application stand out? And I don't know, I'd be interested to hear other people's thoughts. I mean, I guess my thoughts are, you know, I think somebody thinks you've got to write some terrible, shocking line in your personal statement to make people stand up. I did read one a few years ago about somebody, it cut to somebody trying to saw somebody's leg off in the Amazon on some expedition that had gone wrong, which I thought was really upping the ante actually for a personal statement. But it didn't necessarily get them shortlisted. So personally, I don't think kind of shock tactics are terribly helpful from that point of view. But Liz, yeah, I'd be grateful to hear your thoughts.
I think, okay, some more golden rules about CVs is that they're they're sort of a legally binding document. You know, they're the sort of a it's not. I don't think academic CVs is a place to sort of show off your non-academic things, because most academics, they're not particularly interested if you can chop someone's left leg off in the Amazon. They, to be honest, they want to sort of see that they're, you know, what your academic achievements are. White space is your friend. So I see CVs where it's far too much crammed in. I think clear headings. Oh, okay, well, I'm going to get going now. So you don't need to put CV at the top of your CV, because it's like obvious. It's like saying piece of paper. So, you know, make sure your name is clear, that the headings are clear. I would be careful of using capitals, because capitals are quite hard to read. But do use bold, so you can use bold on your particular headings. I think there was a question about if you need it to be more than 2 pages, or follow the rules. But if they say a 2-page CV, then just do a 2-page CV. And I go back to what I said earlier, is every single line, ask yourself, why am I telling them this? So I'll give you a very specific example. Do you need your address on your CV? Now, a lot of applications, there's a separate form, an application form, that's got your address on it. So you could save 2 or 3 lines and not have your address on it. The other thing is, in terms of address, this is a little detailed thing, is that research has shown that if, say, you were applying for a studentship at Imperial, but you live in Scotland, then there's unconscious bias is that male applicants will move and female applicants will not move. Now, it is complete bias, but if you put your address on it, then you're giving people some information that they are making unconscious biased judgments about. So for me, I haven't put my address on my CV for years. It doesn't matter where I live. So again, ask yourself every single thing. Why am I telling this? How is this relevant to what I'm applying for? I would very much focus on the last 5 years, apart from your qualifications and your education. At some point when you get a PhD, you can start dropping your education off, which is pre-university. But again, you know, outside, I mean, sometimes outside activities are quite useful, like Angela was saying, that shows you've had a level of responsibility. But quite frankly, I've seen thousands of CVs, and when people put their outside interests are reading, going to cinema and travelling, that does not make you stand out. So it's what really makes you stand out. But Kevin, not the shock bits. I think that's not. No, and I personally, right, this is absolutely my own personal, I don't like personal statements on top of CV. I think they're a completely waste of time. I think I could write a personal statement for all of you. They don't tell me anything. So, but that is very much my own personal viewpoint, and others might disagree with that.
Liz, I thought for one horrible moment you were going to say there was unconscious bias against the Scots.
I'm married to Scots. No, not at all.
I agree with Liz. I think personal statements are a waste of time, and I rarely read them. I mean, what do they add to the CV? But I can tell you a true story about CVs, and there is a very eminent professor in London who turned up for a chair once and came straight off the plane from Africa with his torn jeans and T-shirt and bag on his back, and you know, just looking a mess, and didn't get his chair. And the next year, I was in the professorial meeting where, you know, they look at CVs and decide, well, no, 2 years later, whether or not they go forward for a chair again. And his CV came up on the pile. It was about 1.5 inches thick. And the front page was full of print, none of the white spaces that Liz was talking about. And the head of division at that time lifted it and said, "I think not," and threw it in the no pile. Lucky for him, I took it back to my office, and it took my secretary and I a week to remove 200 rubbish papers from his 500 publications, and to remove all the other rubbish and garbage that was in there and bring it down to a decent 30 pages or something. And we cleaned him up, got him a white shirt, cleaned his shoes, cut his hair, and he actually charmed the panel. He was a brilliant researcher and one of the, you know, the foremost opinions in this country in his field, but wouldn't have got his chair if his CV had kept appearing like that. So the advice you're getting about CVs is relevant whether you're applying for a PhD or whether you're applying for a chair later on in your life. It's really important to be succinct and clear and have the spelling right and the grammar right. That's my contribution.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just off to take CV off the top of my CV, actually.
Me too.
And I think I just like, so when people are talking about personal statements on CV, I think you're kind of referring to these kind of mini mission statements that people do about I am a forward driving thinking, which I do personally think of a bit of waste of time. But what I sometimes don't think of a waste of time is if there's quite specific skills that a post is looking for, I often might highlight them at the top of my CV. So if they're looking for people with experience, you know, maybe it's a post and they're really looking for people experiencing, I don't know, genetics or something, I might state that again, even though it's somewhere else on the CV, just so it's near the top. And when people are doing the first sift through a stack of them, it doesn't hurt to point out why you are really, really suited for something, I think, personally. Jeffrey.
Yes, like Kevin, I think I wanted to stand up for, you know, aspects of the personal statement. I think if your CV is a bit thin and you think that will not impress the selectors, you need to find that part of the application where you can talk about your forward thinking. You can show that you have thought about the project you're joining or you want to join. You've thought about what their lab does. You know what they're strong in. You've imagined yourself working in that group. You may have an idea about what you want to bring. Those things can strengthen your application. So you might not put it on your CV, but it might be another part of the application documents, either a space on the electronic form or another thing you have to upload. But do not waste that space with empty bragging about your personality type and things of that sort. But I think it can sometimes rectify your CV if you think there isn't very much to write on the CV itself.
Okay, great. Katie?
And just to complete the set, I think that what I would say that stands out is that you've actually thought about that personal statement, you've structured it, you don't jump all over the place. So CVs are one thing, but the personal statements are much harder to write. And I know from experience, lots of students will come and see the career service about their CV. And then when I say, well, what about the personal statement? They say, oh, I'm just going to knock one of them out. I'm like, actually, they're the hard bit. That's the hard bit, that personal statement explaining why you want to do something for that particular role. And I think that that's what makes things stand out and adds that impact, is that if the reader can see you've spent some time to structure up that personal statement and you're not kind of jumping all over the place or just listing everything from your CV, you're actually explaining why you really want to do that particular program and that particular research topic. And that's what makes something to stand out for me. It's not about, you know, cutting someone's leg off, but actually how you've reflected on what you've done and put that into context of what you want to do. And if you can do that really well, then I know if I recruit you or take you on for this PhD, you're probably going to do really well in it because you've actually thought the process through and you understand why you're doing it. And just a final word on personal statements on CVs, absolutely not compulsory, make them specific. If you're applying for jobs outside of academia with big companies, quite often you do need one purely because they use computers to read CVs first. So just for completeness, different CVs for different roles and industry related roles, a lot of them will need that personal statement. So sorry, I know that's not what we're talking about today, but just to clarify.
No, that's really helpful, I think. Liz?
Yeah. Kevin, just add a couple of more things. Is again, you know, the internet's a great place to search for things, and I think it's really important to match your CV to the norms of the country or the institute that you're applying for. So so I know overseas, some countries, say Singapore, it's normal to have a photograph of yourself and your date of birth and your address and your citizenship and all those sorts of things. But we don't tend to have those in the UK. We don't tend to have photographs. And so again, the thing is to tailor your CV so it looks local. So it looks like a, you know, on the pile, it would look like a sort of British academic CV. The thing that I'll sort of anticipate a question is about the spelling, English spelling or American English spelling. What I would always say is the English spelling of English things. But if, say, someone who was at an American university and they were in the Centre for Medicine, then I would use the American spelling because that's what it was there. This is a very tiny point, but I think it's just about making it look. Just remember that 8 seconds, Katie, for your hard. But just remember that 20 or 30 second rule, but make it look local. So thinking about if you're applying for to a country that does have photographs, then again, make it professional. This is not your Facebook profile. This is a professional photograph. So I've got loads more to say about CVs, but we probably should maybe answer some other questions.
Okay, that's great. I guess I had one final thing, which I think when we're talking about personal statements or CVs, and when I'm talking about personal statement here, I'm talking about something requested separate from your CV in an application. And I think people often say, well, I've put that on my CV, I don't need to put it in the personal statement. But think back to how long people are spending on this. So you're in a stack of 100 of these applications and people are going through them, but they are not keeping everything in their mind or referring. So I think if stuff's really important, you definitely need it on both. There's no problem with reminding people that you got it first or you graduated first in class or things that really make you stand out. I would definitely have more than once in your application if you can. You're just reminding people about it. And you can stitch that into the personal statement because, I don't know, perhaps you're talking about you know, how much you enjoyed your undergraduate in this subject, and actually you were lucky enough to be awarded, or you know, you worked hard and got this on your, you know, this very high mark on your project, which is on a similar area. So you can kind of bring these positive points in a slightly more organic way, rather than just saying, look, I'm the best all the time. Okay. All right, so we've covered quite a lot of stuff there about an effective application. I'm keeping an eye on the Q&A. Things aren't moving up and down very much, and actually a lot of people have answered a lot of stuff by text. So I think the last the area we talked about, or we wanted to discuss, was how to give good interview, I guess. So I guess maybe thinking about maybe what to do if you're invited to interview, what to think about beforehand might be really helpful. First of all, I don't know if anybody's got anything they want to say about that.
I can wax lyrical about interviews for a long time. The first thing I would say, just as it's unfair you're thinking that somebody judges your CV in 8 seconds or whatever, it's equally unfair that someone judges you at interview the minute you walk through the door. And I know this from 30 odd years of experience. When somebody walks through the door, I've kind of not made my mind up, but I've categorize this person, and if I don't like them for one reason or other, it's quite an uphill struggle. They've got to persuade me, therefore, that they're somebody worth having. So I can't emphasize enough, get somebody to watch you, take them into a room, the kitchen or the dining room or something, and watch you coming through the door and sitting down. You've no idea what a difference it'll make. If you come in hunched up with the idea that you don't want to be here, or you're so busy you could be doing something else, or you don't like this crowd of people and they're not going to like me anyway, and you're shy and your head's down, it's a non-starter. You've got to walk into the room with confidence, with the air of enjoying that you're going to be here. You might learn something, they might learn something from you, and what the hell, I'm going to have a good time for 10 minutes and I'm not going to be silly about it. That's really important. If you get the panel on your side right away, the interview's plain sailing and enjoyable. The other thing I would say is don't shake hands with people the minute you walk in. If they want to shake hands with you, they will make the first move. A lot of us in infectious diseases don't like shaking hands with people because we might get your cold or your infection or something. So just wait till they make the first move, and don't grab the chair and sit down. Wait till they invite you to sit down and then do so. Then you're all in a nice, friendly manner, and the interview should go well. If somebody asks you a question, engage with them. Don't look scared like a rabbit in the headlights. Listen to the question, take an interest in it. They're genuinely interested in your answer. So there's no need for you to be either aggressive or cocky or frightened. Just talk to them. It's not a performance. They really want to get to know you, and you need to get to know them as well. So look them in the eye and engage the other members of the panel if there are other people there too. Quite often in these PhD programs, 2 or 3 people will be interviewing you. And as Liz said earlier, anything you've written in your CV is fair game for that panel. So if you've written down something, you can guarantee somebody's going to ask about it. So be prepared for that. Every line in your CV, you must have some evidence or something to say about it. And you never know who's on that panel, not just the supervisor that you're wanting to work with, but he may have hauled in a colleague to sit there. And if he asks you a sort of general question about science and you say, oh, I'm absolutely fascinated by this new virus, COVID, you might be sitting next to the world expert on COVID. So don't say that unless you know something about the virus, the disease, and the pandemic. So just, be careful. That's all I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Can I come
Who's
in?
up next? Liz.
Yep. So, okay, absolutely agree with everything. Mara's probably interviewed more people than I have, but I've interviewed a lot of people. And although it goes against training that you're not making judgments, you are. And especially if you're doing about 4 years ago, I did 6 days interviews, interviewed about 55 people, and these are long days. And so it is so important the way you walk in. I'll talk a little bit about what you wear. Is you want to be remembered for your brilliant interview, not for the slightly quirky things you're wearing. So professional, hate to say it, but bland. because you don't want to be remembered for, you know, oh, the person who wore the bright yellow trousers. I mean, on an interview panel, if you're interviewing 10 or 20 people, 10 or 12 people a day, which I have done, I'm sure other people have as well, is you tend to identify a tag. So because you just can't sort of really remember during the day. And so you might say, oh, that was a really interesting person who was doing really keen on doing geology and had great examples. But then sometimes people wearing crazy things is that you say, oh, yeah, that was the person who wore the yellow trousers. You don't want to be remembered for, at the end of the day, for the person wearing the yellow trousers. Interviews are not, I think, interviews are not really about catching you out. And so sometimes we get candidates that can be a bit defensive, and we're really not trying to catch you out. We're just trying to pick the best people and get the best from you. So it's quite useful to remember that, you know, they may be quite tough. And Murray's absolutely right. You know, your CV and application is free game for people to ask you questions about it. But we're not there to catch you out. A standard question is why do you want this studentship? There's the careers series, and we'll have loads and loads of questions. And I would, in terms of prep, is actually just go through them and start mocking, sort of thinking about answers. So why? Classic one is why you? Why should we pick you when there's another 10 candidates? And that can be a really hard question to answer. So sometimes we have candidates who say, oh, I don't really know. And I thought, well, if you don't know, I don't know. So things like that. If you're sent the people on the panel, on the interview panel, I mean, do look them up, but don't stalk them. Okay. So what I mean by stalking them is contact them before the interview, or suddenly randomly connect with them on LinkedIn. That's sort of not really the done thing. Sometimes you get, well, nearly always you get a panel will say questions at the end. So they'll say, do you have any questions for us? So when I have a candidate who basically rolls that piece of paper and says, I do. I've got like 6 questions that my heart and the rest of the panel are heart sink. So my golden rule, sorry, lots of golden rules this afternoon, is 1 question only. And don't ask a question you could have found out the answer for. So if, say, you ask a question like, how many studentships are you taking on this year? And in the advert, it says we'll be taking on 30 studentships. That's not a good question. I don't mind the question when we'll be letting people know. But if you don't want to ask that one, don't waste the opportunity to say something at the end. So it could be that, you know, I'm really keen for the studentship, etc. But just don't ask loads and loads of questions. And then think about your exit. OK, so stand up, thank the panel, and then leave. So not a good look if you run out of the room, which I have had someone who ran out of the room. But just keep it professional, wear something, you know, professional, and actually enjoy it. It can be really enjoyable, but prepare, big time prepare.
Okay. Next up, Angela.
I think that the enjoy it part is excellent advice. I also think you should take it as an opportunity. It's an interview that goes both ways. So you should be learning as much about the institution. If you've never been to the city before, take an opportunity to see where you might be living, learn about the department. If there's a chance to speak with current PhD students, ask for that. So it's for you to decide if you would enjoy spending 4 years there as much as for the panel or the supervisor to decide if you would be a good fit for that research group. I also think you should be prepared for different forms of assessment, if you will. So there's an interview. Sometimes academics may ask you to come and visit the lab and demonstrate something, and be prepared for that. That's their way of trying to decide who might be the best fit for their research group, and who might be the best fit for the particular type of research. But again, it's an opportunity for you to learn as much as possible about that place before you have to move there and work there for 4 years.
Jeff.
I think it is very good to visit the lab, and if you're given an opportunity to do that, or if you ask, and to speak to some of the current students. Do be aware, though, that sometimes that is a kind of hidden part of the interview in some cases. and the professor may well say to their students and their postdocs afterwards, what did you think of? What did you think of Katie? What did you think of Moira? And if they didn't think much of Katie or Moira, they will tell the professor. So it can sometimes be a difficult line to walk. So you certainly don't want to say anything or ask anything that's unprofessional or that puts you in a bad light. But of course, you can ask questions about the ethos of the lab and how hardworking it is, and do you have to work weekends, and who has published lately, and things like that. But remember, the walls have ears, and anything you say there may actually be decisive in the end in whether you are given a place in that lab. But to come back to a point that I think Moira made earlier, or it might have been Liz, you don't have to be defensive. So don't say in the interview, well, that thing was in my CV, didn't you read it? They may or may not have done, but they want you to engage with them. They want to see what you're like to work with. And similarly, if you have a lab tour, don't come across as a negative person that's always looking for problems or difficulties. But all the other advice you've heard just now is very good advice, and you can use it either for your PhD applications or for your job interviews in other fields.
Sorry, Kevin, sorry, Katie, do you go next?
I need to go at 3, so I was just going to add my little bit in before. One of the things that we always talk about at the career service is preparing yourself. So quite often, well, for some PhDs interviews, you may be asked to do a presentation about your research or answering a certain question. And what I see is lots of students who spend hours and hours doing this preparation for this presentation, but they don't balance that with actually preparing for the questions that you're going to be asked. So make sure that you put this sort of stuff in perspective, because actually the presentation is worth some marks, but actually you still need to think about the questions that are going to be asked. And whilst you can't guess every single question, you absolutely know that they're going to ask you why you want to do it, why you want to do it for them. And you also probably know they're going to ask you something about some of those key skills you need to do a PhD. So think something about problem solving, something about communicating and adapting, potentially collaborating, depending on what the PhD is, something about your lab skills. So it's almost like in advance, you can sit there and draw up a mind map or whatever works for you. I know some people prefer spreadsheets, and then you've got kind of almost like a database of stories you can draw upon to say, if they ask me about a time when I had to solve a problem, I can talk about that specific time in my undergraduate research that I did. Or if they ask me about a time I had to adapt my communication, then I can talk about this time when I was in one of my clubs and societies. So that preparation is to create that database, and then you can start to practice your answer to some of those questions. But by creating the database and almost cross-referencing your CV with the skills they're going to ask you about, you've done that preparation in advance. And actually it's preparation that'll be useful for most interviews because they ask for quite similar skills. So that's a really practical way of just making sure you've got a database of stories you can start to draw on when you're actually in an interview, because I know nerves is something people are always a bit worried about. So thanks very much, guys. I need to duck off and see a student, but please do feel free to get in touch if you have any careers related questions, and good luck with your PhD applications.
Thanks very much, Katie. Liz?
Yes, so I absolutely agree with what everyone said. These are gold dust we're giving to you all. Just a couple of other things is not all the interviews are set up that they have a glass of water. So nerves can make people very dry mouthed. So take some water with you, or a bottle of water. Make sure you do look at everyone. So I've been on a number of panels where I'm the only woman. And then sometimes there can be a bias assuming that I'm the secretary or the administrator, and there's been several times when actually I've been the decision maker on these particular appointments. So just make sure you look at everybody. I'm not sure, we probably don't ask these questions anymore, but a very popular question used to be, what's your biggest weakness and your biggest strength? And I hope we don't ask those, but sometimes people do, you know, just to try and warm up candidates. So again, think carefully about what your answer is. So your biggest strength, sometimes I've had candidates where they say, oh, I can't think of anything. So that's not a particularly good answer. But then when I say, what's your biggest weakness, they don't stop talking for 10 minutes. And again, that's not always particularly helpful, particularly if they say, I don't really like lab work, or I'm not very good at it, and that's not going to go down very well. So again, you know, there's banks and banks of questions, and if you get an interview, just do prep, think about answers, talking them through with people, and it's your body language the way you're answering these things, but also just there can be some really hard questions, and to sort of shrug and say, oh, I'm not quite sure, isn't a good way. But in an interview, some people will be very nervous, and it's okay to just pause. So if you're not quite sure what the question is, academics are notorious at asking multiple questions in one go. You can actually ask for clarification. So again, sort of just, I hope for people coming in to an interview that they are the best they can be. They've done lots of prep, and they're there and wearing appropriate, sit down confidently, and off they go.
Okay. All right. And oh, everyone's in there. Okay, Angela first. Then Laura.
I was just to add to Liz's comment about if somebody asks you multiple questions. Also, if someone asks you to problem solve something, they're probably looking to find out how you think and not necessarily for your final answer. So it may be that you want to say, I'm just going to talk this through out loud, because that's probably what they're looking for, is for you to explain your thought process, and don't be afraid if you're nervous. Everybody is going to be nervous. It's very rare that I see someone to interview who is not nervous. The panel knows that. And so if you come in and you're nervous, just realize that that's okay. And if you need to take a minute, that's also all right.
Okay, thanks. Myra?
I actually like to see people if they're slightly nervous, because it means they care. You know, they're worried about the interview, and it means something to them. So nobody's going to eat you at the interview. I was going to take up a little point that Katie mentioned, that you may be asked to give a presentation. If you're told that you have 3 slides to give a presentation, they don't mean you take your 10 slides that you usually use and you stuff all the information into 3 slides. So you have to give that some really careful thought, where, as Liz said, there is space on the slide, there is lots of white space. You've got the key points there that you are used as a sort of aide-memoire for you, rather than giving your audience a load of information. So if they say 3 slides, they mean 3 slides, well thought out, and not stuffed that nobody can read them at the back of the hall, back of the room. That's all.
Jeffrey?
And please don't read off the slides. So come prepared so that you can speak to the slides, but you're not facing them and reading perhaps 100 words that you've written out. So that's not a good way of showing that you have presentation skills. I had another thought, but it's gone. When it comes back to me, I'll write it as an announcement in the Q&A.
I'm just going to come in on the 3 slides, Mara, which I absolutely agree. And when they say 3 slides, they mean 3 clicks, not 3 slides with 10 clicks per slide. Okay, that's absolutely my bugbear. And it's like, do we look stupid? You know, when we say 3 slides, it's click 1 slide, click 2nd slide, click 3rd slide, not click 1st slide, click, 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 2nd slide. So I've been to too many interviews where people sort of do that. Really annoys me. Probably a little bit too much annoys me, but anyway, 3 slides, 3 clicks.
Jeffrey,
my fugitive. Yes, I have. Thank you. You might think, I mean, students on the call, that this is going into too much specific detail, but knowing when to stop talking. So occasionally you get a candidate who's been asked the question and then, at last, here's something they can talk about. And, you know, in an interview, 3 or 4 minutes can seem like a long time to the people on the panel, particularly if you're not giving them the evidence they've asked for. So coming back to Angela's point earlier, when you're asked the question, pause, think, what does that question mean? And then answer that. And you can always say, would you like to hear more about that? Or have I said enough about that? Or I can talk some more about that if you would like. But it's a fine balance, knowing when to stop, but it's an important interview skill.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think also people often trail off a bit, that they find it difficult to end a statement. So they say something that's perfectly reasonable answer, and then they feel they need to start talking about it. But actually, you need to pause for a couple of seconds just so that somebody can ask the next question at some point. You don't need to just go in, oh, yeah, that sort of thing at the end of what you've just said. Angela.
I think in terms of how you prepare as well, practice out loud answering the questions. It sometimes will sound different when you answer a question in your head and you think you've got all the points covered, and then you go to say it out loud and you realize you forgot half of it. So whether you're rope in a housemate, rope in a relative, practice talking through your answers to your cat. Whatever it is, out loud is going to give you better rehearsal than practicing in your head.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, actually. And I think also it's very easy to read a question or think about a question and think, this is what I'm going to say about it. But actually saying it is very different, and you don't realize the bits you're going to get stuck on or not quite put together properly. I sometimes recommend to people going for fellowship interviews that if they don't have one, they actually practice in front of a mirror, which makes them seem slightly psychopathic, but is actually pretty useful for most people, because you see where you're kind of touching your face or a bit nervous, and also you're just kind of aware of yourself and what you're saying in that context. Yeah, I had a few other things, mainly touching on stuff other people have said as well. I think one of the tensions of the interview is that the interview panel want to get to know the real you, and you've got an idea of what we're looking for that leads to you kind of projecting what you think we want to hear. And there's a bit of a tension between those two things that I don't think you can entirely escape. You're not necessarily putting on an act, but you're wanting to show yourself to your best advantage. And the interview panel think they want to get down to the who are you really? You know, will you do well at this kind of thing? But I guess in that context, often, you know, we've talked about being a bit more relaxed in there, and, you know, if you can enjoy it. But I mean, it really is true. And if you prepare well, actually, it's much easier to get in that position. You can think, look, I've done as much as I can. I know this subject. I'm really interested in this. If I go in there and think, OK, I'm just going to answer honestly the stuff they ask me, you can sometimes just be a lot more relaxed, and it can come a lot easier. Maybe to help with the prep of that, sometimes I say to people, well, you kind of know some of the basic questions people are likely to ask. Maybe beforehand, if you put a table together, OK, it might be, what is your research experience? Why do you want this project? What experience of teamwork do you have? Or this kind of thing. It doesn't mean you need to write out an answer for it, but you have a table of the question or the quality they're looking for, and just bullet point what evidence you've got that meets that. So you can say, oh, you know, my undergraduate research project, oh, I worked in the team when my Saturday job was a top man, all these things. Don't write out a paragraph because you sound really robotic, but it just means that for everything they kind of answer you think, OK, I've got to mention these 3 points. And it's just, you're a bit more relaxed because you kind of know what you're going to talk about. And hopefully whatever gets thrown at you, you've got something that you can say about it. So yeah, well, I'm now lost my train of thought. That's a little too relaxed. Yeah.
Can I take up a point you've just made, Kevin? If you go onto Google and you put in transferable skills, it gives you a list of 4 hard skills and 20 soft skills. Now, some of these you might not recognize as being transferable skills. So I always think of transferable skills as being good communication, blah, blah, blah. But there's a whole lot of others. And there's a private exercise, just in your own time, away from interviews. It's not a bad idea to look at each one of these and think to yourself, well, what's the evidence that I've got that skill? And just make a note. And that way you prepare yourself for almost any question that they're going to ask you, because they're going to say, you know, do you have any experience in A, B, C, D? Or you've thought about it, just going through these skills and making little notes about yourself. I think that's useful.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. And sometimes actually going back to Liz's point about if people might ask for a weakness or something, sometimes in that kind of context, you can say, well, I used to be very worried about my communication skills. And so what I did was, or how I developed them was to do this certain thing. So you're talking about it, but actually you're saying, look, you've got yourself together enough that you realize these things and you can address them in a way, and that can be helpful. So one of the other points I was going to make as well is that I think when you're talking about things like past experience and projects and things like that, don't expect people to be an expert on it. So if you've done a project on something, you kind of need to explain why it was important or why it was an interesting question. But also just bear in mind that people might ask quite obvious or questions that are very obvious to you that they don't know. And sometimes I think often interviewees are very, they think they're being somebody's trying to catch them out or asking a more complex question than they are. And I guess going back to Liz's point about, you don't stalk the panel, but it is worth looking at what the panel do. People tend to feel more comfortable asking questions on their own field, on their own ground. And so they're often looking for aspects of your background or things you're interested in that overlap with them a bit. So if there's a professor of statistics on the panel, they're probably going to ask you what statistical approach you did to analyze your data. And if there's a public health expert on there, it may be that you did some biochemistry work, but actually what they're going to be interested in, well, actually that disease system you were working on, how big an effect is that, or what are the big sort of concerns globally for that? So just think about how other people see it, the prism, and be able to kind of explain it to different audiences. Jeffrey.
And related to Kevin's point, be respectful about other people's science. So if somebody says to you, why do you want to work on this clinical project that involves patients? It's not a good idea to say, well, only human studies matter, because 2 or 3 of the people on the panel might work on fly genetics or something like that, and they don't want to hear you dissing the area of science that they work in. And so whether you're aware of who the panelists are or not, don't be narrow-minded about how wide science is. And I say that because I've heard several examples of that in real panels where students have, I think, tried to show thoughtfulness or maturity by being very fixated on one approach to science or one scientific model. But actually the message they're giving to the panel is that they're closed-minded and they're not going to read widely or think about other approaches to the problem.
Okay. All right, so I think we are probably approaching the end of this panel. So we've been through most of the phase of the application process. You've had a lot of hopefully decent advice around that. And when I look at the Q&A, there have been a few added recently, but in fact they've generally been answered, I think. So I guess at that point, I would like to very much thank the panel members for coming in today and talking to you all and providing their expertise. So thank you very much, guys. Also, people behind the scenes, so Alexander, Nishin, Shala, and Indika, who have been helping answering your questions and putting the whole thing together. And I guess I'd just like to remind all of you who are watching, so you should receive an email after this, so you should receive a link to the recordings. You can go back through and listen to our wisdom in much greater detail. I'm sure you probably have on repeat for the next couple of weeks or so. But you should also receive an email with a feedback survey, and we'd be very grateful for that. If you had a chance to fill that in, it shouldn't take you very long, but it does help students in the future, so we know how to best tailor it to students' needs. But at that point, yeah, I'd like to thank you all for coming along. Been lovely talking to you, and I guess the best of luck with whatever you decide to do in the future, but particularly if you decide to apply for a PhD, and particularly Imperial, I guess. Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.